The bolt cutters sounded like gunshots. I watched through my sister's shaking phone camera as a woman in a bathrobe and a bad sense of entitlement cut the lock off a Jeep that belonged to a federal task force, and in 30 seconds she turned a petty HOA feud into a federal crime scene. That metallic snap was the worst kind of stupid courage, loud, permanent, and completely blind to what she'd just set in motion. My name is Mark Rodriguez, and this is how River Glen tried to take my family's life apart while I was 8,000 miles away. I grew up in that house. My grandmother's kitchen smelled like warm tortillas and used napkins full of lipstick notes, and every floorboard remembers me. When she passed, I kept the place in the family not because I wanted an argument with suburban real estate, but because it was hers. I'm in the reserves. I work federal task force cases when I'm not drilling, and the Jeep in my driveway was a work vehicle marked necessary, packed with specialized surveillance gear for ongoing investigations. It wasn't an eyesore, it was evidence and property of the United States. River Glen looks like a postcard. Identical houses, pristine. Hedges, people who carefully measure every blade of grass, but behind the shutters lived Linda Parker, the HOA president, with a realtor's smile and a tyrant's footnote. Linda's husband, David, sat on the city council, which is relevant because people with political friends feel cartoon legally bulletproof. 2 weeks into a deployment, an email hit my sister Mia's inbox, notice of violation, unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. Fine $50 day, escalating. Deadline 48 hours. The language was precise, clinical, weaponized. Mia drove over, tiny, stubborn, her teaching lilt turned thin with worry. She showed Linda copies of my orders, photos of the Jeep's decals, everything. Linda didn't blink. Rules are rules, she said, like she'd recited it in the mirror that morning. That tone, the one that makes you aware you're speaking to someone who values power more than people, stuck in my head. I called the JAG, Meiji. Patricia Williams opened the file and told me not to freak out yet, then quietly said words that made my blood run cold. If they try to take federal property, this ain't HOA business anymore. But before law could move, Linda moved first. She escalated late-night inspections, security photos taken at odd hours, anonymous letters slipped under neighbor doors, and worst, a pattern of targeted violations against military families. The Johnsons got cited for noise, the Martinez family for distracting garden decor. Piece by piece, Linda used the rules to squeeze anyone she decided was inconvenient. There was a night, the one that almost broke me, when I sat in a concrete bunker hundreds of miles from home and read a video Mia shot of our neighbor Tom Henderson, a Vietnam vet, asking Linda to stop. I listened to Mia's voice crack and then repair itself into a kind of anger I didn't know she had. For a minute between radio sweeps and mission checks, I thought about giving up. What right did I have to make my family suffer because some suburban queen liked beige? Maybe I'd been arrogant, leaving the Jeep there. Maybe I'd miscalculated deployment logistics. Maybe I'd made my family a target by being who I am. That thought, the one that tastes like shame, was heavy. It sits in your throat and makes you imagine every version of losing. I let it sit because it had to be felt. Then Mia found the folder. She pulled an old packet of HOA minutes emails between Linda and David, a contract referencing Phase 2 acquisition target properties. In the margins, handwritten notes with addresses. Our house was circled. The money trail was ugly. HOA checks paid to a shell company tied to David Parker's development venture. She'd weaponized bylaws to force sales, depressed property values, and line the pockets of the very people writing the citations. That discovery flipped the switch from terrified to furious. It was the clarity you get when two separate wrongs line up and form an organized pattern. My doubt evaporated like smoke. This wasn't a small person pettiness, it was a scheme. And the Jeep wasn't just a Jeep, it held equipment tied to active investigations. Moving it could compromise cases, destroy evidence, and endanger operations. I called Captain Sarah Chen. She asked one question. "Do you want me to bring the hammer down?" I said yes, in the quiet way people do when there's no other option. Linda tried to box us in by play-acting legality. She sent a registered letter, remove the vehicle in 24 hours, or it will be towed. She hired ExecGuard, a private security outfit, to patrol the block and take photos of the Jeep at odd hours. They drove a white SUV and photographed our driveway like a wildlife documentary. The neighborly whispers became a chorus of sideways looks. The worst was the little things PTA gossip, the whispered question to Mia's principal about safety concerns, the slow, poisonous drip of reputational damage. Then, one dawn, she chose dawn. Like a coward, Linda showed up with bolt cutters and a tow truck. I watched the clip live, Mia's hands trembling, her breathing shallow as she zoomed in on the metal snapping. "She's cutting the lock, Mark," she said, and the world tilted. Bolt cutters, a tow truck idling like it had a purpose. Linda barking orders from the front lawn. The driver hesitating when he saw federal markings, and Linda yelling that the HOA had authority. It was absurd and terrifying. The lock broke. What she couldn't know was the Jeep was wired not for art, but for duty. It pinged. Cameras caught faces. A hidden GPS screamed position to a federal endpoint. An alert went off on my captain's phone while I watched through a cheap live stream. Within minutes, a team we'd trained with for months was mobilizing. This is the part where you realize certain rules are different when the United States government's property is on the line. Federal Marshal Supervisors, a JAG brief. The neighborhood watched as radios began to choreograph the arrival of real authority. Linda's last move was to lock the gate behind her like a petty monarch sealing the drawbridge. That action closing access to federal property is obstruction. It's not a parking dispute. It is a threshold crossed from small-town meanness to federal felonies. They came with lights and procedure and notes and search warrants. They came with the kind of presence that makes people stop pretending. I remember the sound of the handcuffs dull final, and Linda's face changing through stages, defiance, confusion. Then the slow, ugly bloom of recognition that she'd misread the power she thought she owned. David tried to run through a back door and ran straight into agents who had him on the timeline. Cuffs. Evidence removal. An assistant U.S. attorney reading counts that used words like conspiracy, embezzlement, theft of federal property, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. The crowd that had been divided by gossip and fear watched as these words settled over the Parker name like a legal thunderclap. I said things into a microphone I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times but never actually spoken. You thought a ruler and a notice could take people from a life. You didn't count on us keeping receipts. There was no cheering, only the exact kind of silence that means a story is finally being told honestly. I'll be honest, I felt no triumph in that moment. There was no parade, no cinematic embrace. What I felt was a hard, steady relief edged with grief for all the small cruelties that had happened long before the bolt cutters. The point wasn't to see Linda in cuffs. The point was that we stopped the machine. Mia became the interim HOA president by petition. Not celebration. She sat at Grandma's kitchen table, sorting through boxes of meeting minutes, names, dates. We froze accounts, we changed bylaws to explicitly protect service members and federal property, and we helped other families who'd been quietly pushed out see the papers that proved they'd been targeted. The legal process ran its course. Indictments were filed. Trials followed. The narrative shifted from a private war to a model case. When community power becomes organized abuse, it can be prosecuted on a federal level. I tell this story because it's easy to think small tyrants are harmless. They're not. Power without accountability is a slow-acting poison, and civility is no substitute for justice. You can be petty in the small moments and monstrous when you build a system around your pettiness. So, if you ever feel the knot in your stomach, that creeping doubt that you're the one who's wrong, let it stay long enough to learn and then use it to sharpen your aim. Justice is messy. It's slow, and sometimes it costs you more than you expect, but silence always costs more. Remember the lock. Remember the snap. Stand up before the bolt cutters find you. Lesson. Bureaucracy can be weaponized. Don't let it be.